anybody wants to read, the whole thing is available at LARivermasterplan.org.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jen Thomas, as all of you know, mostly, and I want to welcome you to the Fridays at 1:30 today. It is my distinct pleasure to be introducing our speaker today, Jessica Hensen. She is a principal at Olin, and I'll read her full bio in just a moment, but she's going to be talking to us about the LA River Master Plan. She's been doing a lot of work on this, and I think it's a really interesting and important project in contemporary landscape architecture. So I was hoping that she would be able to present at one of our Fridays at 1:30, and sure enough, she is. So I'm going to read the bio she has on the Olin website, so bear with me here. Jessica Hensen is a partner at Olin, where she leads the Los Angeles studio and directs planning and design projects that seek to create socially and environmentally resilient infrastructure, including the Los Angeles County LA River Master Plan and the Rio Hondo Confluence Area project. Her other significant projects include Chicago's Vista Tower, a new residential precinct at the University of Washington in Seattle, the new U.S. embassies in London and Brasilia, the O'Hare Global Terminal, is it Sela or Sela? It's hard to tell. S-E-L-A.
Sela.
Okay, I thought. The Sela Cultural Center and the LA River Index. Jessica's work explores the relationships between hydrological, cultural, and social contexts. Specifically, she explores how landscape architects can create anticipatory design solutions that create more equitable communities in both urban and rural settings and respond to issues relating to flooding and water resources. In her design, teaching, and research, she seeks to broaden the scope of the profession by thinking holistically about the places we live, why we live there, and the environmental, economic, and social effects of our settlement patterns. Jessica is the author of the essay, Wet Plus Dry, Rethinking the Mississippi River Cross-Section, a study on upper Mississippi communities exploring the relationship between income, topography, and flooding along the river. And that essay, it actually appears in this book, a 2019 book titled Freshwater Design Research for Inland Water Territories, a volume Jessica and her colleague Mary Pat McGuire co-edited. Jessica holds a Master of Landscape Architecture from the University of Pennsylvania School of Design, where she won the Laurie D. Olin Award, and a Bachelor of Architecture with a minor in Structural Engineering from the Illinois Institute of Technology. Jessica has also taught at the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and that's where I met her, where she also served as the undergraduate programs chair in the Department of Landscape Architecture. She is currently associate adjunct professor at the University of Southern California. So, she's done a lot. And with us in the room today, we have students from every level. So we have both BLA and MLA students and a few PhD students in the room, as well as several of our professors and some other guests that saw the poster and wanted to hear what you had to say about the LA River Master Plan. So, and without further ado, let us welcome Jessica to Fridays at 1:30.
Well, thank you, Jen, for that incredible introduction. I don't think I've heard my entire bio read in a long time, so I'm humbled and a little embarrassed and really thankful. This is kind of a fun tradition you guys have to end your Friday afternoons with a talk and a lecture, so I'm really pleased to be able to share with you today, and I'm here virtually, so this is one nice thing, I guess, about our virtual world, being able to share across the continent. As Jen mentioned, I've had the privilege for many years now of working on projects related to the LA River, and something that is fun, I think, to be able to do with student and academic groups is to be able to take a little bit of a peek inside to talk about not only the project and the outcomes, but maybe a little bit about how that came to be. And so I'm going to jump right in here and start with just a few facts I'm guessing some people in the room know the LA River pretty well, and maybe others are like, what on earth are we talking about today? So something that's, oh,
Uh-oh. There we go. Huzzah!
can you
All right.
see me now? Okay.
Yep. In a little
Great.
tiny
Hello,
corner.
everybody.
Thanks,
Okay,
Jerry.
so you can see the slides and me next to each
Correct,
other
yeah.
now?
You're small and the
Okay.
slide is the majority of the screen.
Okay, perfect. Well then, hello, officially. So many of you might be familiar with the LA River, but some of you might not. What's so fascinating about the Los Angeles River is about 1 million people live within a mile of the river, which is an incredible amount of people when you think about the state of California's population. It's literally about a third of the state that lives within a half-hour or 1-hour drive, excuse me. And so the significance of this river for not only Los Angeles, but the entire state of California is huge. And what you might also know about the Los Angeles River is that it's very prone to flooding. And throughout history, this has caused dangerous conditions in some cases. In a large storm event, 100,000 cubic feet of water per second can flow through downtown Los Angeles. Just to put that in perspective, Niagara Falls on an average day is somewhere between about 50,000 and 100,000 cubic feet per second. So during a large flood event, the LA River is just tearing with water. It's so interesting, if you're not familiar with the geography of Los Angeles, the LA River itself is 51 miles long. The part of Los Angeles that is considered downtown is right here in the center. It's actually pretty far from the coast, about 12 miles as a crow flies. And so what we think of when you think of Hollywood and Los Angeles is actually here more in the center of this map. When you think of the beach, it's along this edge like Santa Monica and some of the big beach towns. And then the Los Angeles River really flows through what's called the San Fernando Valley here at the north. If you've ever heard of like the Valley, ever watched like Clueless or something in the 90s. These movies are set up here in the Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley. It flows, it turns, makes a corner here past the Santa Monica Mountains, flows through downtown Los Angeles and through what we call the southeast cities, Southeast LA or SELA, before it exits into the Pacific Ocean at Long Beach. So 51 miles by the range of some rivers, it's pretty short, but it has a lot of significance both culturally and hydrologically. Many people know the LA River from movies like Grease or Terminator, and they're very familiar with the portion of the river that flows through downtown Los Angeles. You know, if you've ever seen like the car race where they actually race cars in the river, say in Greece. But the river actually goes through a whole series, about 13 or 14 different types of cross sections along the 51 miles. And this is really important to understand for the purpose of visioning of the river, because it's not just one continuous condition for 51 miles. So it's not like you can just come up with a single design solution and apply it holistically across the 51 miles. The channel is primarily concrete, which was, I'll talk a little bit more when we talk about flooding, but which was completed in the 40s and 50s after some significant flood events. And really was designed just to move water as fast as they possibly could to keep people and property safe. And so in that era, the whole point was how fast can we move water out to protect development. So in some places we have what's called a trapezoidal channel. In some places we have a box channel, which is very tight, maybe as tight as 50 or 60 feet in some places. In some places the channel widens out into a very wide trapezoid. And then there are 3 places along the river that are what we call soft bottom. So in the Sepulveda Basin, where literally soil is the riverbed, like a traditional riverbed, at Atwater Village and what we call the Glendale Narrows, where there's soft bottom, and then in the estuary as you get to the southern end of Long Beach. The reason why we have soft bottom in some of these places is not because of some incredible ecological theory in the 1930s and 40s, but really it was just because those were areas where when the Army Corps of Engineers was putting down concrete, the water table was too high for the concrete to stay down. So it's
Hold
kind of
on. Try again, sorry.
again, yeah,
Typical.
feel free to interrupt if it's not working.
Okay.
So why is the river concrete? So historically, the Los Angeles River was incredibly prone to flooding, as you can see in this map. A lot of the river actually was very ephemeral. So we're in a semi-arid climate in Los Angeles. And so in the winter months, the river might be quite full of water with rains and lots of water coming out of the mountains. And then in the spring as well with snow melt coming out of the San Gabriel Mountains. But in the summer months, often entirely drying up in places. So we had like this sandy river alluvial wash effect in a lot of the San Fernando Valley in the summer months, wet grasslands in the winter, and then as the river turned and came into the South Los Angeles plain, this is pretty flat down here, and actually the river meandered all over this floodplain, sometimes even completely changing course, through soil deposits and even exiting into the Santa Monica Bay. Sometimes also the Los Angeles River would merge entirely with another river over here on the right, the San Gabriel, forming a miles-wide river delta, which if you read some of the journals of some of the early Spanish explorers to the area, they talk about just this coming upon like 4-mile wide marshland, which is this section of the lower river. As time went on and more development in LA encroached upon those floodplains, people wouldn't flood for a decade or 2 decades or 4 decades, and people forgot about the fact that the LA River was very prone to flooding. And so then when lots of rain would come along, people had issues with that. So that's what resulted in what we have today, the flood channel system, which actually is meant to convey large rain events along the Los Angeles River. And so here you can see an example along the river where we have, say, 1% or better, a 1%
Oh, hold on.
100-year event.
Okay, there we go.
2% would be the 50-year. 10% would be like a 10-year storm. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen once every 10 years. It means there's a 10% chance of it happening in any year. So you can see along the Los Angeles River, it's been engineered in a lot of places to manage a 1% chance storm. And then in other places, the flood capacities are actually quite tight, which is a little scary as you think about pressures with climate change. The floods that really cemented, if you will, the fate of the Los Angeles River is sometimes known as is usually called the 1938 flood. And these are a few images of what happened in 1938. And by this time, the significance of Los Angeles to the national economy for defense manufacturing and airplane manufacturing, especially on the eve of World War II, had become so significant that the damage that was wrought during the 1938 flood was not only of local significance, but really of a national concern. And so at this point is when the Army Corps of Engineers stepped in to hydraulically re-engineer the entirety of the Los Angeles River. Before this, there had been channelization efforts, there had been other irrigation projects that go way back through history, but this was really sort of the final straw. So what we ended up with, if you take, for example, a zoom in along the river, well, maybe let me just stop my video in case it's on my end, but see if maybe we can free up some bandwidth here.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
So it's trying a little less hard for a second. Okay, so what you're seeing here in this image is where the Los Angeles River and the Rio Hondo come together. And as you can see, historically, the rivers totally meandered, dried out, desert wash. And then you can see what we have today are these incredibly straightened concrete sections. They have, for the last nearly 100 years, done a great job of keeping people and property safe, but then they are pretty single benefit in infrastructure, right? They don't do a lot for the communities around them. And unfortunately, the history of this channelization comes with a lot of really unfortunate social injustices. A lot of redlining that occurred in areas along the Los Angeles River, barring certain communities of color from being able to access housing and other resources. And we still see the legacy of the channelization's impact and things like redlining today in the communities along the Los Angeles River. A couple more things just to help everybody understand the river. It's very complicated because the Los Angeles Flood Control District and the United States Army Corps of Engineers actually share jurisdiction over the Los Angeles River in different sections, the red, blue, red, blue, red, blue that you see here. So in terms of trying to get projects that are holistic and really truly visionary along the river, it can be very challenging. A lot of people say, okay, so now I understand why it's concrete, I understand why it's complicated. Let's say I wanted to restore that. I wanted to make it more of like a natural wash that it was historically, and I wanted to provide planting or I wanted to vegetate it. A study that was done actually in 2007, so quite a long time ago at this point, showed that to be able to do 70% greening of the channel would basically require expanding the channel to 5 to 7 times its existing width. And so, unfortunately, what we have in Los Angeles, where we have a lot of housing, particularly that is abutting the channel, private property, homes, it's very difficult to imagine displacing people and just totally taking we're gonna make a 51-mile totally restored river. Many people then ask a question like, well, okay, so I understand I can't displace people along the river channel itself. Maybe that would be a bad practice. Could I store more water in other places in the watershed in order to take pressure off of the channel volume? This is a really kind of complicated graph, which you don't necessarily need to read, or you could study on the website later if you really want to dig into this. So here's an example of a study. If we were to reduce the imperviousness of the entire Los Angeles River watershed by 28%, it only takes a couple thousand cubic feet per second off the peak flows in the channel. So this idea that we might increase the permeability of the watershed, which is good, we want to do that for water quality, we want to do that to have more recharge of our aquifers, but when it rains hard in Los Angeles, the amount of water in these, like, it's almost like a tropical or like a monsoonal type downpour is so significant that the soils saturate, and even if we have a ton of sponges like around the city, everything from small rain barrels up to giant stormwater parks, even in a situation where we meet very robust goals, we still can't get enough pressure off of the channel to be able to meet that conveyance. So if you look at things like widening the river, you probably already put this together. If we were to widen it, it would require a massive displacement of people on the order of 21,000 to 100,000 people. So it becomes a really interesting design challenge, I think, for us as landscape architects to take into account, gosh, all these technical and social realities, and how do we come up with a creative solution to reimagine the LA River ecologically, socially, and hydrologically without displacing people and without putting people in danger as well.
Yep.
Work looking at how urbanization and how climate change has the potential to historically have affected the watershed and how it might in the future. And what this chart is, this is an exceedance chart. It's kind of interesting that you're looking at here. The green line is the 30s to the 50s, the yellow line is the 50s to the 60s, and the orange line is like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And what we see here is that in the very small storms, here on the side, this is looking at smaller storms on the left and larger events like the 1% or 0.2% storm here on the right. And the smaller rain events, all of our water quality, all of our rain, our bioswales, all of our stormwater parks, all of our low impact development strategies can make a big impact. But when we get to the big storms, we're seeing that everything is filled up and it's still raining. And so what this is showing that over time, as urbanization has increased, In the small storms, our runoff has increased. While we've had more and more hardscape in the Los Angeles River watershed, through the years, our cubic feet of discharge has gone up significantly in those small storms. But in the big storms, we are still the same as we were in the 1930s and 50s. So what this is telling us, what these charts are signaling, is that when we are getting those big storms, we have a significant issue with flood management runoff. And here you can see just how fast Los Angeles became a really significant metropolis with a significant amount of urbanization. We do have a lot of impermeable surface today that we didn't have historically. And so this puts the LA River, which is also subject to incredibly variable rainfall patterns over the history of time, in this very challenging design problem, which is also facing the effects of climate instability and climate change. Right now, we're seeing that what historically would have been considered the 100-year event is probably more like the 65 or 70-year event. And so the intensity of our rainfalls is getting higher. So it's likely to rain less frequently, but more intensely when it does rain. Okay, so now you have the primer that you needed to know to start diving in to some of the LA River Master Plan items that we're talking about here. If you look along the river, there are 17 different cities. The city of LA has 23 different neighborhoods along the river. So it's an incredibly diverse patchwork of communities, of different ethnicities along it. And it's also very fragmented ecologically. So there's some really significant reserves in the mountains around Los Angeles, in the Santa Monica Mountains, in the Hollywood Hills, and up in the San Gabriel Mountains. But we see a lot of fragmentation in the urban areas of the Los Angeles River. So trying to relink some of these upland and riparian corridors, trying to think about novel ecosystems in the urban habitat, thinking about the urban-wildland interface is a significant need for the Los Angeles River. And unfortunately, the LA River has kind of been seen for the last 75 years as a little bit of the backyard of LA. A lot of people that are wealthy want to live in the hills, or they want to live along the beachfront. And so we see that a lot of environmentally burdened and socially vulnerable communities live along the Los Angeles River. So this map is showing, compared to the entire state of California, which is called this CalEnviroscreen study, it ranks about 21 different factors of environmental health and social vulnerability. And you can see that the Los Angeles River flows through some of the most burdened communities in the entire county. We saw this signal also in COVID over the last couple of years, that some of the communities that were the most underserved historically, and some of the most environmentally burdened currently, also were the greatest impacted by COVID, which is just a lot of, you'll see a lot of these studies are showing, gosh, if we could think about how to move the needle for the Los Angeles River, how could we start to reimagine this for the communities along it? At the same time, right now, you might be familiar, Los Angeles County is facing one of the most significant housing crises of its history. Housing has obviously, for the last 100 years, been a significant need in LA. Right now, potentially worse than it's been in decades. And we have a lot of pressure around displacement. Many of you probably have studied or are familiar with issues of green gentrification, the issue that when a park is built or a new infrastructural improvement, on one hand, that's great. We want to see new parks. We want to see new connective networks. But on the other hand, if the people that we're intending to make that space better for can no longer afford it to live there, have we truly succeeded as landscape architects? So this is something we're spending a lot of our time at Olin thinking through, is how our projects actually support development that helps build wealth and helps build community for all people, not just the wealthy. And so one of the big things about the Los Angeles River in talking about ecological, talking about parks improvements and connectivity improvements, is to think about how we help avoid displacement in communities along the river. And I'll show you in the scenarios how some of the things that we can do might relate to that. The housing gap also relates to our issues with homelessness. A lot of people actually use the Los Angeles River, call it home. A lot of encampments. The numbers of persons experiencing homelessness here has shot up significantly. It's gotten even worse during the last couple of years of the pandemic. And it's certainly a public health crisis as well along the LA River. So the master plan itself was really guided by, of course, a very robust community engagement, public engagement process, the most robust that LA County has ever done in their history. A technical steering committee of 41 people made of experts and different community leaders, and then the technical and design team with, of course, our consultant team. So Olin, the landscape architecture and planning team, led the overall corridor planning and overall project. The prime for the project was an engineering firm named Geosyntech that does a lot of work internationally, but here locally is heavily invested in river hydraulics and ecological and environmental systems. And then the architectural member of the team is Gary Partners, who might be familiar with Frank Gehry and his team and his work around the world. And so together, this group helped to inform the plan. To start off, we started off by reviewing over 140 other documents that had plans relative to the Los Angeles River, going back as far as 1930 to the Olmsted Bartholomew plan. So Olmsted's son, who took over his firm, his nephew and his son took it over after his death in the 19 teens and 20s and 30s. They did a lot of state park, regional park plans around the country, and one that they did was the unrealized plan for the Los Angeles region. And this was very interesting. It was done right on the eve of the Great Depression, and they proposed over 71,000 acres of parkland. They proposed a parkway along the Los Angeles River. Unfortunately, there were a lot of governance issues. This never was completed. And when you look back at it, you're like, oh my goodness, that would have been fantastic for Los Angeles. But it didn't happen. Over the last 3.5 decades, a lot of efforts have been trying to reimagine the Los Angeles River from the concrete flood channel to something more community related. So there's the city of Los Angeles did a plan, there's a lower river plan. In '96, the county did their first plan. There's an upper tributaries plan. But the issue is that no plan had really taken into account all 51 miles with a social equity lens, which is what the overall 51-mile master plan is aiming to do. So it's really aiming to bring forward all of those known projects, all those proposed projects for enhanced watershed management, for parks, and bring them into a clear and understanding for all 51 miles of the river. So really seeing this master plan as part of a timeline. So the original county master plan, which was done in '96, here we were in 2020 for the master plan update. It was just adopted this year in 2022. It's a 25-year plan. But there are all these additional other studies going on, and this is something I would encourage all the students listening today to think about is how do you make sure that you're the most educated person in the room when it comes to understanding other work that is happening in parallel to your project. This became really critical to the Los Angeles River master plan so that projects could keep moving forward, studies could keep going forward, and the master plan was actually bringing them all together in a way that could become the region's core plan. So this is a little bit of a look inside, like what does it look like to try to bring a team together to work on the master plan of the Los Angeles River. So this wasn't a slide that I would put in a public presentation, but I think it's sort of fun. Kind of looks like studio, right? Everybody trying to figure things out. Some days having fun, laughing. This is us in a conference room trying to map out budgets around the cost of some of the improvements we were talking about for the plan. And then, other days you're out along the river. One of the things that I think I could not have ever expected with something like planning for the Los Angeles River Master Plan is just how I never expected my job to have so many ties to politics, like the election cycle, who's in office, what are their priorities, what are they trying to give to their constituents. This is this California State Speaker, Anthony Rendon, and he's been a really big champion for the Los Angeles River because he recognizes that his district, which the river runs through for quite a distance, is significantly underserved. And there is a vast amount of land in the LA River right-of-way that he is passionate about bringing parks and connectivity to his communities. This is an example of like a steering committee meeting for the Los Angeles River Master Plan of all the people coming together to talk about and help guide the plan. This is that 41-member committee coming together to provide input and insight, us giving a presentation on the latest updates. So there were 8 meetings like this throughout the process to get their guidance and their feedback as technical experts for the region. And then, of course, you have your smaller work sessions in the office where you're trying to work. These are a couple of my colleagues at Olin and one of my colleagues at Gary Partners. One of the big efforts was mapping out sites along the Los Angeles River, and this is us figuring out which lands really provide opportunity space along the river. Overall, the plan main process was about 3 years with community engagement and input. About 1 million people engaged one way or another, whether that was online or in person. There were town halls, telephone calls, teletown halls. We had a youth summit with about 800 high school students. Community engagement is really exciting. Also opportunities to do special events. Really people from across the entire county participated. We also were able to have things like festivals in the riverbed, photo galleries, indigenous persons, discussion about the significance of the river, both historically and presently to Native communities. Really bringing together a vast array of people and trying to come up with additional kind of fun ways to bring in things like kids and others, especially during the pandemic, through some of the other literature. How do we really get people involved in reimagining the river from what it is today, which is a lot of people see it basically as a concrete sewer, and we're saying, how could we see the river as something different? How could we imagine an iconic river with connected public open space, even seamlessly woven together? We really wanted the LA River to be an integral part of life, not just the backyard, not just where people go to do illicit activities, for example. We really, how do we start to build this thriving urban habitat around it while still understanding that the LA River helps keep us safe too. From that community engagement process and the community's vision, 9 goals emerged that were important to the neighborhoods around the river. And they really were broad in range. I think a lot of people expected the Los Angeles River Master Plan, which was being led by a engineering group, the County Flood Control District, to be very singular minded. But you'll see here in these 9 goals, it's flood risk, it's equity, ecosystems access, education, addressing housing issues and impact to persons experiencing homeless along the river, water quality, water supply, safe parks and open space. And really all of these goals were critical to the community and critical to this plan. Through that, the way that we started to build that out, for those of you that might be curious, and you can read the whole plan, it's online. I'll give you the website at the end. But we started to work with the steering committee to develop what are called the goals, actions, and methods. So under each of those 9 goals, there are very specific actions and methods that support making those a reality over the next 25 years. If you aren't, if you've been tuned out, this is probably the one slide to listen to, and you'll get the whole strategy of the master plan. This chart is a little bit like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, building from the bottom up. Really starting with the foundation of what the community needs, what the community around the goals were, and then looking for site-specific opportunities along the 51 miles, using a kit of different types of design elements that could feasibly be used, and then a series of what we call common elements that help to bring unity along the river, things like wayfinding and other amenities to make the river more usable. It's not very usable. It's very, actually very difficult to inhabit along the river today. It's very hot, very just uncomfortable, very unsafe in some areas even. So we needed a couple of ways to be able to talk about the river. It's a big system, and one of the first difficulties that we had is when you take 50 different data layers and you overlay them on a map, basically you just get like the color of mud, right? You can't really read anything from that. And so we started to develop what we call the LA River Ruler, a system of measurement, a linearization of the 51 miles of the river. And we all, the different disciplines on the team, agreed to use this system to be able to quickly analyze information along the channel. So for example, if we look at park need, red being areas of high park need along the Los Angeles River, we could quickly pull out along the river in this linear, almost like reading a DNA strand, where the most hotspot issues of park need were along the river. This allowed us to quickly start comparing things. So in this case, for example, we're saying, okay, where is the high park need? How does that relate to the high environmental burden areas? And where are we seeing those overlapping? This became a really easy way to start to understand needs of the communities along the river. And so this is, I think, really critical for us as landscape architects. Is I think sometimes we don't come up with good ways to communicate with engineers or with other professionals. And so we all worked together to put, whether it was social information, engagement information, hydraulic information, or anything else into this system to be able to work together. And then we could use those to overlay data sets and understand, relative to each goal, what communities were in the highest need. From that need, we looked at how it overlaps with opportunities areas along the river, and then this idea of a cadence of parks and amenities along the river. Unfortunately, throughout history, development along the river has been uneven, and so some communities have gotten more and other communities have gotten less. This whole study, which was a significant part of the effort of identifying sites and properties along the river, resulted in a series of course, pulling forward projects that are already underway or exist in other plans already as planned major projects, and then identifying 22 new potential areas for improvements along the river, as well as almost 100, I think it's like 190 small and extra small either access or gateway moments along the river. For each of those, we looked at the technical feasibility of what could be done along the river, and there were 6 high-level categories. This is really meant to be a kit of parts. So the LA River does not say to a community, you have to do this in your community. It says, hey, there's an interesting site in your community. These seem to be the high needs in your community based on what we learned from you. And here are some strategies that could work in that area. So it's not prescriptive, it's not imposing on local neighborhoods what they have to do. It's giving them a menu of strategies and then saying, let's partner together to make these multi-benefit strategies a reality. And it's showing in each of these cases how it can relate to wildlife habitat, how it can relate to biodiversity and plant species, how, you know, something like a wildlife bridge could be part of a section or a connectivity bridge, and bringing all of that together to say, hey, community, let's work together to reimagine your river. And these are just some examples. Again, if anybody really wants to look at them, it's all online. I'll send you a link. And then at the end of that, really saying, what are the things that we need for the river to be able to function? Some sort of cadence of restrooms, bike racks, lighting, consistency of signage, and being able to find your river. It's funny, sometimes you're in the LA River and you're a block away and you don't even know. There's no signage, there's no cue that you're that close to the Los Angeles River. And so then my last couple slides here, and then I'll take some questions. We did provide some examples in the master plan of different types of projects that might emerge from this kit of parts and needs framework. So some are site-based, and then there are some that are system-based where many different sites are working together. So for example, there are some site-based ones where we say, okay, this is a community that wants access, they want connectivity across the river. What could a park that includes wetlands and a connection across the river look like for them? We looked at places where we said, okay, the river is really tight here, the capacity is low. How do we make a naturalized channel bypass that could function as a native plant arroyo here, so that when it rains, it can take pressure off the channel and also create habitat areas. And then of course, in terms of the many sites working together, we looked at things like regional connectivity along the bike routes that come out from the river. So this is where we start to get back at like the scale of what the Olmsted plan was doing in 1930, and how does this river become not just a river of, you know, connectivity along the 51 miles, but really into the larger regions. And then the last thing I want to mention here is the affordable housing piece. So I told you that we're in the middle of a housing crisis. So something that has come, that we've been working on in parallel with the LA River Master Plan that has now come to fruition is the affordable housing land bank here. And the LA County, I'm proud to say, officially initiated on June 14th of this year. They've allocated the first $50 million towards it. And what this is the proactive purchasing of properties that are at risk of displacement along the Los Angeles River in advance of parks and infrastructure projects. So this is probably one of our proudest achievements. This is what's really happening right now out of the implementation of the plan, is to really start the process of reserving land for housing and affordable housing before real estate speculation around the Los Angeles River is taking place. It's really excited about this since that $50 million allocation, that pilot program is now getting up and running. And by 2026, the intent is that there will be somewhere on the order of 6 to 9 sites established as affordable housing sites along places along the Los Angeles River that could be at risk of displacement due to improvements that will be made over the next 2 decades. So it's really exciting as a landscape architect to see our work now influencing policy in the way that it was intended. And of course, there will be construction projects coming along the river, but this sort of work around housing is really laying the groundwork for the future. With that, I would love to take some questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Wowzer, that was a lot.
I know, yeah, sorry.
No, that's,
I
there we
will
go.
say, I promise
No, it's
that
great.
if anybody wants to read, that was like, you know, 1,000 pages of documents and 50 slides, but if you want to read more, the whole thing is available at LARivermasterplan.org.
Nice. Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. So, questions?
Great
So,
question.
yeah, you heard that, okay.
Yeah, so I'll answer 2 questions. I'll answer the funding for the creation of the master plan, and then I'll talk about the implementation funding too. So let's start with that. So implementation funding, the estimate for the next 25 years for the master plan is $19 to $24 billion, which sounds like a lot of money, but when you take that over 25 years, we're talking about $1 billion or so a year. Some of that funding will come directly from the flood control district budget. So the flood control district has a dedicated tax here in Los Angeles to just maintain their operations. Another bucket of funding is something we call the Safe Clean Water bucket here. It's a few years ago, voters levied a tax on our own selves to improve water quality around the region, and that provides about $300 million annually for regional water quality improvements. So that's a funding mechanism. And then I think one of the most significant will be state and federal infrastructure funding dollars that are starting to roll out. So the state budget for the first time in, I don't know, decades of California was actually in a surplus this year. And so there have been some allocations for projects along the LA River, particularly the Sella Cultural Center. It's gotten about $125 million. So it will be pieced together from that sort of scale. Some of the funding might be through other cities, like City of LA or other cities that pitch in, but for this scale of dollars, we're really talking about county, state, and federal dollars leading the way. In terms of completing the plan itself, like who paid Olin, and how does that sort of thing come into being? It's interesting, we actually started working on projects related to the LA River pro bono in 2014 and 2015. The city of Los Angeles, out of their 2007 master plan, had started an organization called a nonprofit that was intended to catalyze projects along the river.
Yeah, what was the name? Sorry, what was the name of that organization again? Because it went out when you said it.
Oh, River LA.
Gotcha.
And
Thanks.
so that was a nonprofit they started to catalyze projects. And after a few years, they were trying to figure out how to do that. And that's when they went to Frank Gehry and said, hey, Frank, you are probably the most well-known, well, maybe the most well-known architect in the world, definitely the most well-known architect in Los Angeles. Could you help us think about this? And Frank said, well, I'm not a landscape architect. You really need my friend Lori Olin. So if you guys know Lori Olin, he's a now retired landscape architect, the namesake of my firm Olin. And so Frank called Lori and said, hey, can you come help us think about the LA River? And Lori's good friends with Frank for decades and said, sure, I'll come out, but I'm gonna bring some people from my office that work on rivers and things like that. So then Lori's like, hey, come up, Jessica, let's talk about the river, and one of my other partners, Richard. So at first we were working pro bono for a couple of years to imagine this, and then some of the state conservancies actually got excited about the data that we were assembling and offered a grant to put together the LA River Index. So when Los Angeles County decided to update the overall master plan, which they voted to do in 2016, we were already at a position where we had been doing some of that grant-funded work, and they reached out to their on-call engineer list to get proposals and do interviews. And we had been working with Geosyntec and Gehry Partners at this point. And when we went into the county, they were like, oh my goodness, this is phenomenal. Like this data-based approach to community needs, that's what we need. And so they hired our team. The funding for that project in a big way came from a state allocation that Speaker Rendon, who I showed that picture of, championed, along with some funding directly of the flood control district. A master plan of this scale can easily cost on the range of $5 to $10 million in fees for all the different consultants and people that are involved, and probably that much again in terms of the staff time that the county has put to it over the last 4 or 5 years.
I'll summarize it with what you said last, right? So given that, Frank Gehry and his reputation and so forth, I guess Minte's wondering, what role does he play in this, and how, are there perhaps tensions or something with that, right? Because given, is he steering things more, or is it more collaborative? How does that work with somebody with a name like that? And I mean, granted, Olin is also a very big name, so.
Yeah, great question, great question. Well, so Frank is incredibly collaborative and insanely smart. Frank is 93 years old now, and Lori Olin is 84. Yeah, 83, 84. Lori's been retired-ish since 2008, but he does more, he's very active. So I think the way that Frank, working with him is, he's very interested in accuracy. So when we first started working in 2014 and 2015, he didn't want to just do a sort of design proposal. I think a lot of people, when they found out Frank Gehry was involved in the LA River, thought that they were gonna have like a Bilbao Museum sitting next to the LA River, and that's what they thought was gonna happen. Which is obviously not at all. If you open the LA River Master Plan, you will see nothing of the sort. And so I think they were really worried that that might be the result. But I think what Frank is really interested in his office is process, and he was really interested in understanding the hydrology of the river and the ecology of the river. So the first thing that when he was at he involved us from Olin, and then we met with a ton of different engineering firms to figure out who would be best. And so the process has actually been very collaborative. Now, obviously, when like the New York Times or the LA Times writes an article, they really love to emphasize Frank and the fact that Frank is really well known and he has incredible projects around the world. But yeah, for us, Gehry Partners actually very specifically, when we did the scope, they said, you're the landscape architects. You have to lead the planning scope of this. We, can insert on obviously the architecture, obviously some of the kit of parts analysis and study, and some of the planning components. Gehry Partners has been really instrumental in, one of the partners there and myself, leading the housing work. So that's the kind of way that they're plugging in a big way. Frank's very passionate about the housing issues, and I think if he were on right now, he would say the thing that's really disappointing is a child growing up in the southeast cities along the LA River has a 10-year less life expectancy than a child growing up in Santa Monica along the coast. And we have 2,300 acres of land in the Los Angeles right-of-way. They can be parks, they can be open space, they can be healthy habitat. How do we reimagine this for future generations of our children? I think, so he's been the big force behind that.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, we're running close to time, so I think that's where we're going to have to leave it. But that's a very positive place to leave it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, let's thank Jessica again for talking about this day. Thank you so much, Jessica. This was great.
Yeah.
This was really great.
Enjoy the rest of your day, guys.
Okay, yeah. Bye.